I think I don't think this statement that he made applies to the problem that Reginald presented. He presented an issue where player careers are short and sweet because of how much the game changes, and that's understandable, right? You get burnt out because you have to always play 12 to 14 hours a day. The game changes, and you need to kind of always put in the same amount of work. You can't really rely on experience in that regard in terms of I played this patch like a patch 1 year ago. It won't help you in the current patch, right? You always need to practice, and that's what Reggie is referring to. And then this is such a crazy statement to make towards Reginald, because every player that has ever been on TSM is so well off. I can't think of a single player that has been on TSM that is not well off in terms of how much following they have, and in terms of what teams they're on. They're still in the LCS. I think being in TSM is like you kind of set yourself up for success, almost guaranteed. Just looking at it from an outside perspective of how TSM is being ran, and then Tryndamere claiming that teams should invest more money into League of Legends because that's where they gain it from. It's like saying, let's say you work at a factory, and instead of getting paid in money, you get paid in coupons that you can only use at that factory. It makes absolute no sense. It has nothing to do with what Reginald said, and I think the response in general is quite sad.
Why do you think? Well, like, what's the motivation here for Tryndamere to come down and say this to Reginald in the first place? What's the point of going out in the public eye and making a statement like this for him? Can you imagine?
I really don't understand it. I think it's a very, very it's a poor move to go onto Reddit as one of the top guys in Riot and responding, and then backtracking and editing. It's as if he just was bored one day and decided to comment, and now he's obviously regretting it because he's trying to edit it to make it look better. But in reality, he got called out for his shit, and I think what I'm really looking forward to is Reginald's response to all of this, because the one issue is also how he tried to kind of paint the issues that have happened in the past with like a nicer light, which is always sad to me because everyone sees through that shit. I think this comment was in general pathetic to me.
Yeah, it is a little bit strange why you would do this. You might think his PR handlers had the day off, perhaps, and he was left to his own devices, and while doing that, he just was browsing Reddit and decided to type up some things he thought were funny. He even walked back and said, you're right. Patch timing last year with the Juggernaut patch, for example, was very poor. It was terrible, actually, was his words. It was terrible. So he's admitting one of the base things about Reginald's point is true after having to walk back his entire opening salvo, where he's just taking shots at the owner of TSM. Again, a very strange thing. When you see stuff
Well,
like this, oh, go ahead.
it's just looking at what league really is. It's an esport, right? And there are always going to come games that compete because the world that is the digital world is just so much bigger in terms of what you can actually do, right? In terms of physical sports and what we can do physically, I think we've already explored all the potential options of what can be called a sport, right? And we've reached levels in sport, for example, basketball or football or American football. Any way you look at it, we've reached a point where these are considered they are so traditional that it just is what it is. Change would just be strange because it is just tradition. And I think the difference in esports is the fact that there's this landscape where new games can come in, and of course, games need to change in order to always remain relevant. If things are the same for too long, people are going to get bored because the landscape for what you can create in the digital world is just so broad. So, from a perspective of Riot, of course, the competitive scene, since it has no sponsorships, there is no broadcasting rights that are being sold. This is not to make a profit. The game and every player and every coach, they're just working to promote the game. That is our job. We're supposed to promote the game, and the competitive integrity is, it is not that relevant as people think it is. Every patch is just catered to, of course, the general people. There are a lot of nerfs that happen just because a lot of people in bronze are suffering against a champion or whatever. To be fair, in some cases Riot do change towards competitive as well, so I don't want to bash on them too hard on that. But changes need to happen, otherwise the game is going to be boring. Something that is very questionable to me, though, from Riot's perspective, is their consistency in changes. Like, they make these big changes and it never happens around the same time. If it happens around the same time, then team owners need to look at the game and understand their position, that they are in a position where they're just promoting the game and they just need to do the best with what they have, and changes can come at any time. We just have to accept that. And then, since Riot has a tendency to put out these random patches, then we just need to look at players that are well-rounded and have like a tendency to adapt. And looking at it at a general aspect, I feel personally that I've accepted the fact that I just work to promote the game, and competitive integrity. You can't reach the point where League is always competitively in the best competitive environment that it could be, because there are so many outside factors that are more important than the competitive part of the game.
Now, I wanted to ask you more broadly here, when someone who is a co-founder like this steps up and makes these kind of comments on Reddit and has to walk them back, people already have questions about Riot's intentions, about Riot's PR, their ability to work with teams in a healthy way, a positive way. Doesn't this just feed that much more into the perception that Riot is out of touch, that Riot is combative to teams and to players and to extension their own fans?
I think, this comment, there is nothing positive from Riot, from Riot's side to gain out of this comment. I think this comment does, as you say, paint a very negative light on how disconnected they seem from the reality of how we perceive it, because without us, the players, the viewers, then this game wouldn't really work as an idea. And if they are so disconnected from how the owners are, or how the players feel, or how everyone in general that is surrounded, that surround the game, then it's just shocking.
Well, let's not linger on this for too much longer. It's obviously a developing story. We'll probably have more to say about this next week as things continue to come out from either side. We haven't seen Reggie make a response of his own to Tryndamere just yet, so we'll see what falls down there. But certainly concerning to see that kind of word come out of the head of Riot, the top of line of Riot, to see that kind of thought process playing out there. Let's move to something potentially more positive now, the NA scouting ground. I'm sure you saw this. We're going to have top players from each position go and be invited to the LCS studio in North America, play with professionals, and basically have a little combine, a little bit of a training grounds there, as it says, the scouting grounds. Your thoughts on this, and how could it help to, well, what do you think is the effect from this? Does it help to level up the top players? Does it make the players who are involved in Challenger have a better motivation to get to the top level? What does this do for you?
I love it. Personally, I love these kind of things, there is nothing bad to come out of it. I think the biggest upside to me that I see is the fact that solo queue will become relevant and very important again. Like, people have a goal to strive for. I feel like at this point in time, solo queue is at possibly it's the lowest of lows, where people tend to have very one-sided games, and people kind of play, and they're stuck in this kind of spiral where they just play, and it's just the high low. If someone is rank 1, nobody really cares. He just happened to be rank 1. No one really cares anymore. And I think initiatives like this, where people have a goal to work towards, it is something that is very, very positive, because I think it will improve the solo queue environment in North America, because only the top 4 players from each role are going to be invited. And I think, it depends on how good of an opportunity it is. But I think a lot of young aspiring players are going to look at this and really try their best. And I think we can expect the solo queue environment to be very competitive, and hopefully some new players will show up that are very, very good.
As a coach, would you look at this as an opportunity to see new players, to see some potential players coming through, or would you look through other more, established venues? Like, what does this mean to you as a coach?
Well, certainly it's something that I look at. As a coach, with as much, from my position, I have a big responsibility to, I don't know how it is with different coaches, but personally, I keep track of, you know, I need to make sure I have the best possible roster at the time and look at different values and look at how we can progress or what is like short-term value or a lot of things and a lot of variables come in when I look at players. And of course, I need to look at every possible venue to look at players because in the end, if I don't, I'm not going to have the best possible kind of combination that I think will give me the most value over a time span of a split or two. So of course, looking at this, I will definitely pay attention to it and look at some young aspiring players. Maybe in the future, when Splice, when we get bigger, maybe we'll have a bigger roster that we can supply in the house, etc. And hopefully have a 10-man roster, maybe 20-man roster. Who knows? Only the sky is the limit.
Just speaking in general, what is your approach to looking for new talent, for looking new players? Like, where do you go? Where do you want to go? Do you prefer to look for established pros from pro teams? If you're looking for a new player, where do you find the new player?
Well, it feels like personally, I don't have a way. I don't wake up one day. I really need a new support, or I really need a new this player. I really need this. I never think of it like that. Personally, it's something that I look at all the time. I kind of keep track in my own mind which players that impress me, and then I just keep track of the progression. And there is a lot of variables into looking which players are good and which are not. I think watching over players that impress you and kind of following their progression is what I usually do. And usually at some point I'll come to a conclusion. But in every regard, there's always going to be some type of risk. But as a coach, it's your job to minimize that risk. So in any way, I don't have a specific way to look for a specific role or a specific player. I just keep track of it at most times.
So you're saying you're not looking to replace your support right now?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's just a process. I think it's way too hard to just all of a sudden wake up. Oh, we need to do this. I always look at what can I do to make the team better. What can I do to improve the potential of the team? And I think as a coach, that is your job. How do you do as much as possible with what you have, and you decide yourself what you have. I probably, to a lot of people, I probably make no sense, but it's very, very hard to describe because there's so many variables at play when you look at
Sure.
specific players. And in the end, in a lot of cases, it's just a gut feeling, It's just a gut feeling. Something feels right about this person. And that has happened to me in a lot of cases. And luckily, I've been right in a lot of cases.
Well, speaking of you being right, Yamato, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you received a certain award. Can you actually detail to me, because I didn't get all the context, can you tell me what award you received? Can you tell the audience what you received?
Sure, man. I received an award for the best coach in Europe for this split, Summer Split 2016. I'm not sure what that means because it's hard to judge coaches from an outside perspective, but I got an award, yay.
I think what it means, Yamato, is that you're the best coach in Europe for the Summer Split. That's my estimation. I don't want to read too much into it.
Sure, it does. I think, I'm happy that I received this award. It means a lot to me. I think this is something, any type of award that you can strive for in a competitive environment is always something that you look out for. If anything that is competitive is what drives you, and I think that I'm a person like that. So this award means a lot to me, but I owe it to the players, and the players have made such an immense progress, and if it wasn't for us reaching second place, then I don't think I would have received this award. Of course, our results matter, and of course, from an outside perspective, if a team goes from relegations to the EU LCS finals, then I think a lot of people are going to give me a lot of credit. But in the end, I want to give a lot of this credit to the players because they've put in a massive amount of work, and I couldn't be more proud of them.
Well, you say if that hadn't been for them getting to second place, would not have gotten the reward. I might say in response, if you had not been there, they might not have gotten to second place. So, tit for tat, we could go back and forth on that. Does it feel like a validation though for you? You didn't. First of all, you didn't get fired before the playoffs started. That's a good thing over the EU LCS this split. And second, you got the award. Do you feel like you've been kind of given some due credit here? Do you feel some personal satisfaction, even if your main goal is the team's overall progress? Do you feel something good from this?
Definitely, like the word makes me very happy, but like I've always had this issue for myself where I find it hard to be satisfied by any type of accomplishments that I've had in league because I always tend to look at the next thing. This might sound crazy, but I always look at the next thing, and I kind of find it hard for myself to find satisfaction in any type of accomplishments because I just look at the next thing, and you know I don't know why it is that for me, but maybe that's the reason why I continue on and on regardless of what has happened in my past. There's been a lot of scenarios where things look grim and a lot of people would probably consider quitting, but I continued, and looking at my entire history, then I look at this award as something like a milestone of some kind. So in a sense, I am happy, but I think the fact that I don't feel satisfied is what drives me in the end.
Well, speaking of your being happy and satisfied, the playoffs continued this week in Europe and North America. We'll start in the EU because we're talking about your personal accomplishments. Splice, in the final, first question to you, very clear one. How does it feel to be in the EU LCS final?
Ooh, feels good, man. Wow, it hasn't really hit me yet, like the fact that I'm playing in the finals, this hasn't happened to me in the past, it feels amazing that we've reached the peak of European esports and League of Legends. It's truly amazing to me, and I'm pretty excited because I think the finals is going to be very intense and very close.
Speaking of intense and close, your semifinal series with H2K Gaming, down to Game 5, had to come back to win it all.
Ooh.
How are you feeling in that series?
I have this. It was a crazy series for sure. I think it was definitely a mental battle. I think we prospered as the series continued, and I felt like H2K faltered as the series continued in terms of our mental fortitude. I believe that the last game could have ended either way. We definitely had a very favorable situation. Like the game definitely went in our favor because we had a Gragas out jungling a Rek'Sai, which shouldn't happen. But we definitely felt like we had Jankos under control, which in my eyes was H2K's biggest strength on 6.15. And looking at the series as a whole, I just feel like we adapted way better. It's hard to say if that H2K adapted at all. Like they'd made one adaptation where they took Ashe and Tahm Kench from us, which was good, but beyond that point, I felt like they just kept doing the same over and over again, and it just made no sense to me. And I had no reasons to change anything because I was super happy with the tools that I had presented to me, and I was very surprised that they made zero adaptation for the last game because Game 4 was very dominant from our side. The Gnar performances were absolutely bonkers from Wonder, and Gragas' performances on Trashy were also very, very good. So, I do believe that in general, to summarize the series in my eyes, I think we just won the mental battle.
You mentioned Gnar, and you mentioned the draft phase. I believe you got Gnar all 5 games. Obviously, H2K not believing in the Gnar in the top lane. What was that all about? Were you surprised? Were you happy to take advantage of the Gnar in all 5 games?
Well, I was super happy, I felt like draft-wise, we were very prepared and we made the correct adaptations. We came in with the Sivir band because we thought Forgiven wouldn't play Ashe. And, the first game, it kind of looked like he'd never played Ashe, but, he kind of took control over the champion eventually. I think our adaptations were way better, and of course, having Red Side 5 times in a row, I don't think the big issue was them giving us Gnar, but what they picked into Gnar, and seeing Gangplank and Tanar, I don't believe this is a good matchup for Gangplank. You know, he has some moments where he can do good, but in general, you know, if you recognize the flaws of Gangplank, you can easily punish him with the jungler and dive him over and over again.
So for you, do you feel confident coming out of the HTK series going into your final opponent? I guess before I should say your final opponent, we should talk about the next series actually that was played out. Unicorns of Love and G2. Now Unicorns putting up a bit of a fight here. Were you surprised they were looking as feisty as they were? Do you think G2 would cruise through with a sweep?
I definitely believe that UL is improved. I think 6.15 is a very good patch for them. I think Move as a jungler still looks as weak as he usually does because he kind of just takes risks and it doesn't pay off and then he falls behind. I think Exile, Visachi, Hildesang, I think these three players are definitely showing up on 6.15, and I think UL as a team look like a good contender for the third place spot. But I do believe that G2 had these classic G2 moments where they were ahead and started playing a bit too cocky, and things went wrong, and it was a kind of a classic for G2 in the summer split as well, that the first game they played, then all of a sudden, the first game in best of two, first game went very, very bad. And then all of a sudden they realized that they were playing with their words, they played boosted, usually is what they say. And then the second game, they just turn on the heat and stomp. And I felt like the game 4 was how I thought the entire series would look like, because G2, in my eyes, of course, was the big favorite coming into this matchup.
So G2 is now your opponent in the final, a big final to prepare for, of course, the 1 and 2 teams in the region and the summer split. How do you feel about going into it? Any thoughts to share with us? Obviously, you can't give too much away because you're having to coach your team to potentially winning the summer split in Europe. That would be a pretty big deal, by the way. But your thoughts going into it on a more general scale?
I'm super excited. I felt like they showed some things that we can take advantage of. I have, together with my team, a lot of good ideas on what we want to do against G2. I do believe that, G2 as a team is on paper the stronger one, but I think we can definitely show up on a specific day to compete with that. So I think we're going in confident, and I think in the end what matters is if it is a good day for us, or if it's a good day for G2, or if it's a bad day for G2 or a bad day for us. I think the day matters.
We'll see who has the better day on that day, and we'll see who goes into the next part of the yearly calendar, World Championship, as the EU Summer Split champion. I think Splice is a good candidate for that. But, who am I to say? I'm not the expert. You are the expert, Jacob. And I'll let you handle those predictions for us. Are you predicting a Splice win?
I'm predicting a Splice win. I'm predicting a very, very good series. I think it will be close. I can imagine it going both ways. I don't want to be too biased, because G2 is a very, very powerful
I'll take care of that for you. 3-0 sweep for Splice.
Sure,
Done.
man. Sure.
Done.
The series is a series I'm also excited for, right? Like if H2K lose against UL, we just go to Worlds, and then we can just
That's right.
pick team on the finals. No, I'm just kidding, but it would provide me with great comfort if I know after the upcoming weekend that I can go to Worlds. That is my one hope.
The cherry on top, and then go to the final in Staples Center and play maybe SKT. We'll see, I guess. We'll see if they can see if they can meet you there. It's a question mark
if they
now.
get there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big question mark all of a sudden.
Kick them out of groups, maybe,
You might. They might lose 4 in a row again after MSI. Well, all that being said, let's switch gears now over to North America. We saw CLG and TSM face off in a hotly anticipated matchup, and it wasn't really that close in the final standings. 3-0, a sweep for TSM. The dominant team of the summer split was the dominant team in this series. There was some controversy, of course, with the Aurelion Sol pick. Before we get into the result of the series, I want to go to you on the Aurelion Sol bug, because this is one of the strongest champions, arguably, for Hui. You have a game plan for CLG that's based, arguably, heavily around this champion, and then he gets knocked out of the pool. What does that do for a team, and how does that affect you as a coach? Is it fair? Like, what's your thoughts on that whole situation that played out?
Well, This is also one of the downsides of playing in a digital world. You know, it just happens sometimes. I think the bug was indeed like buggy enough to justify a remake and you know removal of the champion from the champion pool. But you know, it does suck for COG. I don't think it had too much of an impact on the series. TSM was obviously the stronger team, but you know, it does suck. It does suck that who his favorite champion was gone from the pool. But you know, if you look at it value-wise, it's as if saying that TSM gained another ban. You can theoretically look at what happened in that kind of regard, that TSM gained another ban, you know, and of course it is an advantage, but in the end, I don't think that was the reason why TSM won. I just think TSM was by far the better team in this best of five.
Anything CLG could have changed up, affected differently? I mean, any plan of attack you saw where TSM might have had a weakness that CLG could have taken advantage of? It looked pretty tight for TSM across the board.
I think, you know, what Reginald talked about earlier, I think COG is probably the the team that is hurt the most by this. You know, they had this run at MSI when the patch really fit them, you know, and then they came back and obviously they practiced a lot and they came back to the new patch where a lot of things were changed up and finally they're gaining traction, you know, in the words of Reginald, they're gaining traction and getting better by the coming into week 9 and then comes playoffs and 6.15 hits and this strategical team that is revolved around macro play. A big part about macro play in the early game was removed from the game because lane swaps don't exist. So COG, you know, in the case of 6.15, it's just sad for them because that's not where their strength was. Their strength was always in team play, and you know, team play is of course still relevant, but individual skill is more relevant than it has ever been, maybe since season 3. And on that level, I don't think COG is that strong.
But TSM obviously is pretty strong on that level. They've proved that against CLG. The other series, we saw a team that might have benefited from a more individual-focused patch, from a more individual-focused metagame. Immortals get taken down by Cloud9, get upset by Cloud9. Now, Immortals had been a dominant team throughout the split, second only to TSM, way above everyone else. Was it surprising to you to see Cloud9 beat Immortals and beat them the way that they did, 3-2?
I think, you know, it was a battle of progression. I feel like Immortals has been the same team for 2 splits straight, and I think they've been carried by the fact that they have strong players in battle. And I feel like as Huni and Reignover, kind of when people catch up to them, I do believe at this point Huni had a very bad best of 5 and a bad split. I think Reignover also, he has never looked as weak as he did against Meteos in this best of 5. Even though he had a good performance, he didn't look as dominant as people made him out to be. I think Immortals just hasn't improved that much compared to Cloud9. You know, Cloud9 looking at their players individually, you know, 6.15 fits both teams, of course, because they are lane players, very mechanical players with not that much emphasis on macro play. Mechanical players like these scrappy games. This is like a classic thing with C9 and Immortals. Every time they play against each other, it becomes very scrappy, skirmish heavy, and very bloody. But looking at C9, you know, I was a big critic of Meteos during the summer split, but this best of 5 has turned me around. You know, I think this best of 5 truly impressed me. Meteos heavily contested Reignover in the jungle. He showed up big and made Reignover look worse than he is. And on top of that, I think that was the nail in the coffin. If Meteos could match Reignover in the jungle, then Jensen would just take over mid way too much. And I think that's the same thing could be said for top lane and bot lane. Very surprised about top lane, but Impact definitely had a massive impact in this best of 5. Every time I say impact, I can't think of another word that explains the word impact. I didn't want to make that pun because I hate this pun. But impact definitely played better than he has ever had throughout the split. Meteor's the same, and of course, if this happens, Immortals duo reign over in Huni, that's what people always look out for. If Impact and Meteos are going to have the games of their lives, then of course Immortals is going to look very, very poor. But looking at Immortals as a team, there was some things that was so questionable what they were doing, Cannon into Gnar. Cannon's supposed to be a counter to Gnar. Huni solo losing the game by solo dying in this matchup. Horrible. Riven, he did good against Gangplank. It's a good pick into Gangplank. But then you had this base race, and I'm like, I'm shocked. What is going on? Huni has this tendency to just do this move I like to do in solo queue when I know the game is lost. I just walk into a lane and I just push, and fight whoever tries to fight me. And I feel like Huni did that 2 games where, I remember this Lissandra play as well. Like, why did he play Lissandra, to be honest, He picked Lissandra because Jensen played it once and he just wanted to take away, Lissandra sucks top lane. It made absolutely no sense. And then he did this trade, like 1 inhib for 2 inhibs in a tower. And it's just like such a classic solo queue move. A lot of things about Immortals, I'm just shocked. And to be honest, if I want to summarize Immortals as a whole, it's just talent with no improvement.
Talent and no improvement. That's a pretty damning indictment for a team looking to qualify for Worlds, as Immortals, of course, were. You mentioned Huni's struggles here. He continues to be a player who is very much in his own category. Very skilled, of course, offers a lot, but seems very much limited in his playstyle, wants to do things his way, the way that he just goes about them is different than anyone else. I mean, as a coach, like, let's say that you have a team, or you're making a team, you're being asked to take Huni on. Can you, as a coach, have any excitement over that? Or do you just feel like, oh boy, here I go with this guy who just plays the way he plays, and I don't know what to do with him? Like, how do you go about managing a talent who wants to play his picks and do them his way, even to the detriment of his own team, it seems?
Well, it's important, once again, I repeat this every time you ask me coaching questions.
You do.
It's very, very specific to the person and how they are as a person. But, in general, I would strive to make sure that the player understands that I have the final say. Because that's how it is in my team. Sometimes the players go against me. Sometimes they have ideas of their own. But, I tend to kind of mix everyone's ideas into a pot and kind of create something that resembles us. And, sometimes I've taken risks on things that players recommended me to do. Sometimes it paid off, sometimes it didn't pay off. But in the end, I have to make the judgment call and take that responsibility on myself. So in this case, if a player, let's say, for example, even the H2K series, when people complained about the GP Gnar matchup, is it Odo Amne's fault or is it Broly's fault? In my case, I would take that responsibility on myself, because in the end, I am the one that makes the judgment call if I should believe in what the player says or go with my own gut. And, there are a lot of variables at play. I think in the case of Huni, I feel like a lot of the picks that he picks is just what he wants to pick. I think you can definitely have a positive impact on that. And I think there were cases when that happened in Fnatic as well, where they picked a lot of things that it felt like Huni just wanted to pick this. I remember this specific game where Fnatic played against Cloud9, the first game in their group stage, where Huni decided to pick Yasuo into a Darius-only player, which is, a massive question mark. Obviously, Huni at the time was way better than Balls. I still think he is better than Balls. But doing that obviously shows that maybe the player has too much control in these teams. I think he had less control in Fnatic, because from an outside perspective, it seems like Daylor kept track of the players, but in Immortals, it feels like he just does whatever he wants, and I don't think it should work like that. And of course, I'm saying this from outside observations. I find it silly that I need to clarify this, because, I don't want people to attack me. Oh, you don't know what's going on in Immortals, blah, 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 blah. Of course I don't know. I'm just judging based on observations that I've made of Immortals.
I trust you to judge myself. I do. And I think our audience trusts you to judge too. Who better to judge than Yamato, the coach of the split in Europe? If that doesn't qualify him to judge, I don't know what could possibly qualify him for that. And with a team in the finals. Come on, back off. Let him judge.
I'm just going to add that in my passport, like a title, coach of the split.
Resume, passport, tattoo on your back. Just keep it going. Anywhere you
Don't
can put
refer
it.
to me as Yamato Cannon. I refer to me as coach of the split.
YamatoCannon. Yeah. Coach of the Split YamatoCannon. That's a good title for you. I think I like it a lot. This sets up a old matchup. We've seen it before. Cloud9 versus TSM. Stop me if you heard this one in the final of the North American LCS. But a different look this split. TSM, the dominant team in North America, one of the hottest looking teams in the world. While Cloud9 had an up and down split, they brought it together, figured it out in the playoffs, made a good showing in the semifinals against Immortals. Now they play TSM. They had some struggles against TSM in the regular season split. Any chance they have to knock off TSM in the final? And if so, how does Cloud9, do you think, penetrate the chinks in the armor that TSM might have?
I don't believe that TSM showed any like massive weaknesses that they need to do this in order to beat TSM. I generally feel like C9 have definitely showed that they have the tools to play very competitive matches against TSM. You know, at the highest level, a lot of small things are what determines if a team loses or wins. And I think, you know, in this case, it will be very, very close. I think C9 are very positively impacted by 6.15. I think they like to play the lane phase. I think Meteos definitely can outmaneuver Svenskeren based off this play that we've seen in this best of five. But, you know, I think what we really need to look at is the duo in mid. I think as long as Meteos and Jensen play together and try to contest the presence that Björgsen and Svenskeren tend to have through mid lane, then I think C9 have a very fair shot of taking this. I can imagine it going all the way to 3-2. I do believe that TSM is the favorite. I think there's no point denying that because Hunter has definitely been the more consistent player and TSM as a whole have been the more consistent team. But I don't think you should count out Cloud9 at all because 6.15 is definitely a good patch for them, and the players that look like weaknesses are now definite strengths.
When you say that, do you mean impact in Meteos?
You know, like Meteos to me looked like the weakest player on C9 throughout the split. I think Impact had performances where he looked good, and I don't think he deserved the critique that he received, and he even heavily critiqued himself. But right now, you know, Impact is playing better than he ever has. You know, maybe not better than he ever has because he won Worlds, but better than he has on C9. And Meteos, I would definitely say that he's playing better than he has ever have played. You know, and saying that, I think C9 definitely have a fair chance at making this happen because, you know, there were a lot of moments for Meteos when I was like, what the hell is he doing? What is he doing? And right now, you know, when I'm looking at him, I'm like, yeah, Meteos, throwing barrels, catching people off guard, you know. Looking at the series against Immortals, you know, his Gragas was freaking deadly. You know, he was catching people all the time with his ultimates, and I think that is very relevant in North American standard meta play because there is a lot of situations where they have tendencies to group very, very early on and team fight very, very early on. And I think clutch plays like this matters very, very much in North American play.
Difficult question for you to answer, perhaps, but Meteos, obviously a long-time player, had some ups and downs. What is it that makes a veteran player like himself improve suddenly and play at a higher level than he has in recent months when he's been around for so long already? Like, what trigger gets hit there? What switch gets flipped?
You know, like I had some insight in the past on how, you know, when Jensen played with Meteos for the first time, you know, knowing Jensen, you know, he told me he wasn't really having the best amount of time because he was clashing a lot with Meteos, and then eventually Meteos decided to step down because of these issues. And, you know, right now, looking at the interviews that Meteos is in, it seems that he finally has found a way for himself to improve. I think that was the biggest issue for Meteos from an outside perspective, looking at what the players and his teammates say about him was that, you know, he had his own way of thinking about the game and he didn't let anyone impact that. And, you know, at one point in time, his idea of playing the jungle where he went this farm-heavy carry-style jungle that people like to call it, you know, it worked because he revolutionized that and a lot of people took ideas from that. But eventually, Jungler stepped away from that, and jungle was improved, and it became different. And I felt like he, because of how he created this way of jungling, got very, very stuck in his own mindset and thought that always what he thought was the way to play the game was proper. And based off the interviews that we've seen with Meteos, it seems like he finally has, he's willing to take criticism, he's willing to learn, and, it definitely shows. This guy has improved immensely, and it truly, truly shows in this best of five against Immortals, because he was a freaking rock.
We'll see if he can be a rock against TSM. It'll be a bigger and stiffer challenge for him, but he might be up to it. We'll find out when Cloud9 battles TSM for the NA LCS final, and of course G2 battling Splice for the EU LCS final. Now, before we close out here, a couple questions on the broader game, the meta game, if you will. Looking back to your own series, Splice versus H2K Gaming, I believe there were only 15 champions in the pick and ban phase for the two teams. That's or maybe it might have just been the 15 champions who were played, actually, not including bans. It's a small number for 5 games in the playoffs. Do you think there's a situation now where it's just there's a few picks that are so strong they really can't have many alternatives, or is it a case where that's just how the two teams matched up? Like, what is it that brought so few picks to the fore in your game against G2?
It's like in our case against H2K, it was just. Yeah, I
Against
felt
H2K,
like,
excuse me. Yeah, H2K.
It was strange because they made an adaptation, then we made an adaptation, and nothing else happened. Like, we were happy with our adaptation, so we just kept picking the same. We thought they would change things up, and I started thinking about possibilities. How can they cut through it? How can they change their bands? And like, I was thinking about a million possibilities. Like, I lost. I didn't have any pages left in my notebook because I just thought of almost like every potential scenario where they change up their bands, because they're doing the same bands over and over, and the bands were kind of strange to me. And I thought eventually that would change and they would take a different approach, but it didn't change, which was very surprising. And as long as their approach didn't change, mine didn't have to change either. So I was very, very happy. We were getting wins with that approach. I was happy with the situation that we had, so I didn't have to change. But looking at competitive, there are a few aspects that will always be a part of competitive. Is the fact that you always need to figure out blind picks for specific lanes. And always teams will figure out, or like every team will figure out which AD carry has very, very, is good against everything. Like, which champions are good against everything. People always figure out these champions. They'll figure out which bands which allow the showcasing of these champions that just are good in every scenario, and those are always going to show up. These are the champions that are going to be first rotated, the champions that are good in every scenario, and bands are going to always strive to find these champions. Bands are going to be there in order to deny these champions, but always competitive. In competitive, people will find champions that can be blind picked, because you have to find that in competitive. And that is why there's always like these 3 champions that you always see in every game. Right now, junglers, Rek'Sai every game, boom, because it's just so safe and consistent. There is no weakness with Rek'Sai. You pick Rek'Sai every game. Sivir, bam, no weak lane matchup. You can solve her problems against Alistar and Trundle with Tahm Kench. Sivir does poor into Lucian, but Lucian is not good in the current meta. Sivir does very good into Ashe and Jhin, which are 2 champions that are going to get nerfed and are very, very strong. Sivir is a great blind pick. And there are a lot of other champions that are like this, but there is always going to be champions that are always picked, because every single team needs to think, oh, what do we blind pick if the enemy team doesn't show anything? You always need to think about that. And usually a lot of teams reach the same conclusion about specific champions.
So for you, it was more of a matchup between you and H2K, where they just didn't react to you, and that caused the low number of picks?
Yeah, like definitely. I feel like from our side, we didn't need to change up much. We had a very set strategy coming in, and then eventually we adapted, and I was happy with the adaptation. We have a bunch of champions prepared, and this was just a portion, like a small portion of that. We definitely have more prepared, and I know for a fact that H2K have more prepared, but they seemed happy with what they picked into what we picked, and I think that was just what happened. Two sides being happy with what was going on.
Of course, you were happier in the end of the day, but that's
For sure.
that worked itself out pretty easily. One more question here on the broader game. We've seen now as lane swaps were eliminated from the start of the game, we've seen like 5-minute lane swaps, 6-minute lane swaps, attempted at least. Your thoughts on this new development? Is it going to stick around? Is it a good idea? How do you feel about it?
Oh, it definitely is good. If you have priority on bot lane, this has to do a lot with Gangplank as well, because Gangplank is seeing a lot of play, and what you can do is you swap, and the enemy team might not predict the swap. They walk into bot lane and they try to push the tower, you GP ult, and all of a sudden you have this tempo advantage onto the tower, and you can get the first tower gold and potentially defend the bottom lane tower. But this, while GP can make it very fancy and very, very efficient in terms of gold value, you can also do this without GP. In a lot of cases, bot lane, the heavy emphasis on bot lane is because you can push in and you will get the base before, and the enemy team has to push in before basing, because otherwise they will just lose too much CS. So you'll have this big advantage where you can rotate into top lane, and you will have this massive tempo swing, and the enemy team has to be stuck thinking, will they walk into bottom or will we walk into top? And in either scenario, whatever you decide to do, you're going to be at the losing end if you're the bot lane that gets pushed in. And you can't really just stay in bot lane and keep pushing and hope that the enemy team will return, because if they return with items, you're going to be screwed. And if they show up top lane with items, you're going to be screwed. So you are in a very, very forced situation where it's hard to make a judgment call because both outcomes will be bad for you. So definitely this swap is something that is very, very good to do, very healthy to do, and it is one of the key ways on how to get like a massive advantage in the current metagame.
Do you think Riot now will try to switch this out and make changes so you can't do a 5-minute lane swap?
If they want that, they just need to make the defense on the top tower permanent, or that you have to kill towers in a specific order or something. But that's going to be absolutely silly. Oh, kill bot tower, then you can kill top tower. I think it's hard to make changes to this that at this point that won't impact top lane too much. It's silly if you're shitting on your enemy top laner and you can't push the tower because the devil that is the bot lane wants to swap and kill your tower top. Then it's going to be silly. I can't imagine what changes they will make that won't impact top lane at this point in time. So I think this is going to stick around for a long time.
Perhaps make it so the champions are locked into one lane. You have to pick a bot lane champion. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Sure.
You don't seem like a believer in that one.
It's starting to sound like a Warcraft 3 mod or something,
Wow.
In the end, you will just throw a support and an AD carry in like this small arena, a small cage, and this game will turn into a 2v2 game and a 1v1 game and a 1v1 game. Maybe that will happen in the future.
Yeah, Vince will just do 1v1 mid every game. That's it.
Yeah.
What else is necessary?
Sure, man.
Yeah.
Sure.
You can have
Just
a 1v1 pick ban.
Remove all strategy from it. It's just supposed to be a brawl, This is wrestling now, man.
So here's the storm basically. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies to any fans of that. Well, that's a joke. There's no fans of that game. I'm sorry. That's. I think we've said enough today. It's been a good time here talking to Yamato Cannon. It's always a good time talking to Yamato. I really enjoy it quite a bit. I hope you all enjoy it too. In fact, if you enjoy it as much as I do, at least listening to him, you don't actually talk to him, but listening to him, follow the channel down there, somewhere around there. Missed part of the show, it's on YouTube, daily.esports. Of course, on Twitch, we are at twitch.tv/daily. So follow us, subscribe to us, all those good things. And he and I will be back here with you next week.